And now, your feature presentation. It's Filmsplaining with your host, Martyn Strange.
Hey, thank you, Paul. Hello, everyone. Hello, and welcome once again to another episode of Filmsplaining. I'm your host, Martyn Strange. It's a podcast where I teach you how to watch movies. And on the show, I talk about movies that I love, why I love them, and why you should love them too. Today is a little bit of a slight departure, I would say, from some of our recent programming. If you've been digging into the Jallo episode or the Evil Dead series from last week, we're leaning pretty horror heavy lately, for October, so that was appropriate. Today is something quite the opposite. And it's a movie that I sort of decided on kind of last minute. Did not really plan on covering this movie in any way. I had a scheduling conflict come up with some guests that I had booked for a different film. And so today is kind of a just all of a sudden had to drop an episode. And I recently saw this movie for the first time. Was not the first pick from this director that I imagined I would be covering on the show. But when I watched it, I really felt something special, and it felt like a good substitute to throw in for the kind of unfortunate scenario that happened with the planned episode that I had for this week. Anyway, the movie we're talking about today is called The Straight Story. And if you've heard of that, it's probably because you know that it is a David Lynch film. It is, most would argue, his least Lynchian movie. David Lynch himself called it his most experimental film, which is fascinating and wild just within the microcosm of his career and of who he is publicly and as an artist and as a known kind of cinema persona. Very interesting that this movie is to him his most experimental. And the reason that's interesting is because it's kind of a very straight down the middle, good old-fashioned middle American, Americana slice of life movie. There's little to, if any, weird shit that happens in this film. And if you know David Lynch and you know his movies, pretty much all of them are filled with some weird shit. And this is his kind of most conventional, easiest to digest film. And so in that way, it's really an outsider in his filmography. I think it is the kind of definitive outsider artifact of his career. And it's one that I've been thinking about for a long time, but I had just never watched it. There was one point where I think I was trying to watch it one day and had some other stuff going on, and I couldn't engage with it, and I was distracted, and so I held off. And then this last October, I've been mainlining horror movies like they are vital fluids, and I needed a bit of a break. I needed a break from the madness and chaos and murder and blood and evil. So I put on The Straight Story, and it was the exact antidote that I needed. If you're not familiar with this film, it is actually based on a true story. So the story here is that this man, Alvin Straight, in 1994, took up this journey from his home in Iowa to Wisconsin to see his brother, who was in ill health. They had not spoken in many years, and Alvin himself had trouble seeing and did not have a current driver's license or really a car, I don't think. So he chooses to make this journey, which ends up being about 240 miles, on his mower, on his lawnmower. In the film, you see him kind of start out with a mower that looks like it is as old as time itself. He must have had it for the majority of his life. And he eventually kind of has to get a new mower, or new to him mower, because of some malfunctions. And that's like this beautiful kind of green John Deere machine from the 60s. This film, the story here was brought to David Lynch by his longtime partner and editor, Mary Sweeney. She co-wrote the screenplay. This is the first film that David Lynch directs where he does not have a writing credit. He was not the co-writer or the writer on this movie, and this is well into his career, by the way. We're talking 1999, which is when this film comes out, part of the distinct, incredible class of films from 1999, the basis of the Brian Raftery book, Best Movie Year Ever, something that I've used as a template on this show to explore other years as well. We've got another one of those coming up very soon, so stay tuned for that. Yeah, so we're well into David Lynch's career. He had already made his most well-known films. He's kind of on a downturn here after the sort of 1-2-3 punch of ending Twin Peaks and making Wild at Heart, and then Twin Peaks Fire Walk with Me, which becomes his kind of most hated film at that point in time. And then Lost Highway, which now has sort of been reclaimed as one of his masterpieces, was sort of at the time signaling like a kind of a downturn, like, oh, is this guy on the way out? You know, is all of his best work behind him? But of course, upon re-examination, that film actually has a lot to say, and it's very interesting. I had thought about actually covering that one for the show, which I may do in the future. But for now, we're talking about the straight story. This film stars Richard Farnsworth, very well-known, well, I wouldn't say well-known, but he is a veteran actor at this point. He is 79 when they're shooting this movie, would turn 80 the following year in 1999 when it's released. And he was mostly known, if at all, for Westerns. He did a lot of Westerns in the 60s and 70s, did a lot of TV. He was just a very sturdy character guy who certain directors really liked, and I think this role was offered to some other people who all passed on it, and I think Lynch must have been particularly fond of Richard Farnsworth or his performances to give him this role, which I think ultimately became his defining role of his entire life, of his career. He is nominated for an Oscar the following year. Only the second Lynch film to be nominated for an acting Oscar, I believe, after Diane Ladd for Wild at Heart. Long history of the Academy ignoring Lynch's films and his work. This is the first time that Sissy Spacek works with David Lynch after they had known each other for years. Sissy Spacek, of course, was married to, is still married, I believe, to Jack Fisk, the production designer on all of David Lynch's movies. The three of them worked together on Eraserhead. Sissy Spacek helped raise funds for that movie, as well as doing some props and costuming, I think. In this movie, she plays Alvin Straight's daughter, and she has a bit of a disability, a bit of a speech impediment. I found the performance a little jarring at first, but after a while, I kind of settled into it, and I realized what she was going for. It is a very specific pitch, and your mileage may vary on whether this works for you or not, but ultimately, I do think it works for the film. Yeah, this movie it really is a feel-good picture. I wrote in my Letterboxd review, which was simply one statement, that this is the kind of movie that will make you believe in the goodness of people again. It's not anything you can sneer at or toss your head back at. It's not anything that you can be mad at or upset or angry about. It's a wholesome, truly moving, if not sometimes schmaltzy and sentimental, Disney movie. I mean, this movie was produced by the Disney Corporation. Wild to think about when you consider David Lynch and the work he's done making a movie for Disney. He doesn't seem like the first guy you would call, right? But this is what happened. I mean, they took it to the studio liked it. And the score even, Angelo Badalamenti, Lynch's longtime composer, returns for this. Much different than his usual work. If you know his work from Twin Peaks or from Blue Velvet, Wild at Heart, I guess, is sort of a well-known score. Mulholland Drive, probably later, in fact, 2 years after this movie. It's a very different tone and style for Angelo Badalamenti here. The entire score is based around this sort of repeating acoustic guitar theme. This very soft, finger-picked acoustic guitar, very soft, swelling strings in the background. There's a harmonica that flows in and out, and it's all very indicative of what you're seeing on screen, which the majority of is simply this beautiful, pristine landscape of the American Midwest, right? This is something that Lynch has always been sort of obsessed with, I think, having grown up in the Midwest. And, of course, many of his later stories, many of his most well-known stories are set in L.A., but, you have these small-town things as well. And, this is on location. Like, you can see the rolling hills, I dare I say it, the amber waves of grain. There's lots of shots of grain in this movie, which is what I mean when I say Americana, because it is pure Americana through and through. This is a very spiritual look, I think, at the landscape of the American Midwest and of this guy's journey across it, 240 miles. He encounters many hiccups and many stressful situations and has to constantly adapt to them. It's a beautiful film. Basically, what I'm going to do here is just kind of take you sort of beat by beat through the movie. But it's not really a film that is spoilable, I don't think. I think if you have designs to watch this movie, then you probably have already watched it or you're planning to watch it. Listening to this podcast will not change in any way whether you want to watch the film or not, unless you just hate joy and goodness, of which there are a few of us. The movie starts basically very shortly introducing Rose, Alvin Straight's daughter, played by Sissy Spacek. She sort of comes out of the house, says hello to a neighbor, and there's a shot that sort of pans to the window of their home. We hear someone fall down. It turns out that Alvin has fallen, and he can't get up. One of his buddies, who is waiting for him down at the bar, I guess they have this sort of meeting, this get-together, maybe every week or every few weeks, at this local watering hole. And one of his buddies notices that Alvin is late, so he just walks to his house and finds him there lying on the floor. Rose comes back, and they get Alvin up and take him to the doctor. And the doctor tells him that his hips are bad. He's struggling to walk already. He's using 2 canes to walk around, but he doesn't want to use a walker. He refuses to use a walker. This is a great movie about older folks who are so set in their ways and so determined to fight the long march of time that is coming for them. And this guy is one of those guys. He's stubborn. He refuses to use a walker. Turns out he also has emphysema from many years of smoking. He still smokes these small cigars or cigarillos, carries them around in his front shirt pocket. Another thing about this movie is that the characters are just so real and so fully drawn. You've met people like this, and if you haven't, you've certainly seen people like this, either in your travels or elsewhere. But we go back home. Alvin tries to mow the yard. Rose offers to mow it, but he refuses, again, being stubborn, says he's going to mow it. The mower won't start, so I believe the next day they're fixing the mower, but there's a storm coming in, and it's going to rain. And there's a beautiful scene here where he and his daughter Rose watch this storm together inside the house through the window. They're watching it. They're both very just kind of in awe of it. You see this closeness of this father and daughter and how much alike they are and how much they sort of do for each other. They get a call in the middle of this rainstorm. Rose answers the phone, and then she tells Alvin that his brother Lyle has had a stroke. He's in bad health. So Alvin decides to go see him. And actually, there's a great shot here that I just wanted to point out really quick too, because the shot where Rose is on the phone she's in the other room. You can hear her speaking, but the camera stays on Alvin, and you see his face. And you see him sort of processing in real time what this phone call is. It's almost as if he already knows what is happening before she even tells him. He doesn't know who's calling the home, but you can tell by the look on his face that he's aware that something is bad, and he's thinking very deeply about what he's going to do. Alvin decides that he has to go see his brother. And of course, everyone sort of protests to this. Rose doesn't want him to do it. The neighbors, his buddies, don't want him to do it. He can't see well. He doesn't have a driver's license. So how is he supposed to get there? Well, he hitches up a trailer that has all of his supplies, his food, where he's going to sleep, things to start a fire, all these sort of essential camping gear, at least what he has. He hitches up this trailer to his lawnmower, after fixing it, and he hits the road. There's a great scene where he's pulling through town, pulling kind of by the bar where his buddies are at, and they're sort of yelling at him and wondering what's happening. And very soon, he doesn't get but maybe a few miles out of town before his mower breaks down. And there's this kind of sightseeing bus that pulls alongside the road. It's full of old ladies. They're all taking pictures on little disposable cameras. He gets a ride back into town. He gets pulled back into town by a truck, actually, I guess, who picks him up. And then there's this fantastic scene that is sort of the first like little bit of departure from the setup of the movie, where Alvin shoots his mower with his gun, and then it promptly blows up. The engine explodes, and it's a great like comic, funny element after we've kind of like gotten into this serious sort of tale. So he goes shopping for a new mower, which is basically a used one. He comes to this lot. The lot is run by Lynch regular Everett McGill, actually the only Lynch regular in this entire movie, which is really interesting. I'll talk more about that in a little while. Big Ed himself from Twin Peaks. He sells Alvin this old mower for a couple $100, I think, and it works fine. He's doing well. He at some point passes a hitchhiker who follows him to his camp, and this is the first scene. This is the first of a few scenes where we get Alvin kind of starts talking about his life and his story. He offers the hitchhiker something to eat. She's a young woman. She is pregnant. And she says, "What do you got to eat?" And he says, "Wieners." And she goes, "Oh, wieners." There's this just funny, like, little convention of repeating the word wieners a few times I thought was amusing. Alvin tells this young woman who's pregnant about his own children. Turns out that his wife had 14 kids. He says 14 babies, and 7 of them ate it, implying, of course, that they died. But there is a sort of thread left hanging here where we're wondering, well, what happened to the other 6 kids? Because the only kid we meet or see in the film is Rose, his daughter who lives with him. So this implies that he's got 6 other children, presumably who have not died yet. So we don't know what's happened here. Another bit of layer to the mystery. He tells her that he's going to Wisconsin. She's talking about Wisconsin as a party place. There were some other characters earlier in the movie talking about Wisconsin being a party place. I don't know what this is or if it's just a running gag that Lynch thought was funny, but Wisconsin seems to be the most kind of innocuous, sort of safe place you could imagine. I don't know why they're calling it a party place. Anyway, and then he explains a story about how Rose had children. He had grandchildren. And Rose's kids were actually taken away from her after there was a fire in her house that she actually had nothing to do with. She wasn't even there. But her being disabled, the state took her children away from her, deeming her unfit to be a mother. And so there's a really soft, tender, and powerful moment here where, and the camera actually flashes back to Rose briefly during this scene. Alvin wakes up the next morning. The hitchhiker's gone, but she has left a little bundle of sticks. And this signifies another story that he told her the previous night about one stick signifying one person being able to be broken very easily. But if you have a bundle of sticks, i.e. a family, and you tie them all together, it's very hard to break them. And the hitchhiker obviously was moved by this story, so she leaves him a bundle of sticks tied up. And he smiles at this, and we keep going. He pulls up into a barn at one point to shield himself from a storm. Beautiful storm, just like the stuff that they captured here is really great. Much more landscape in these passages here. A large group of cyclists pass him. He gleefully waves at them, and then they end up sort of staying in the same campground, and we get another kind of short scene of him talking to a guy, explaining some things from his life. The next sort of most important scene, and I think one of the real linchpin, to pardon the phrase, moments of the movie, is when he's driving and there's a car that comes around him. We hear a car wreck. We don't see it, but he sees it. And then it turns out that this woman in this car has hit a deer. Well, she gets out of the car and she starts kind of screaming. And she's going on about how she's constantly hitting deer. She's hit 13 deer in 7 weeks. and she's sort of maniacally like pulling her hair out and doing all this business, and Alvin is just sort of sitting there patiently listening to her and like, allowing her this moment. And this to me is the most like Lynchian scene of the film. Just the way that she's talking about she's hit 13 deer in 7 weeks, and she has to drive like, she can only drive on this road back and forth to work, and her commute is like 40 minutes to back and forth to work every day. And so she keeps hitting these deer somehow, and she's like prayed about it, and who knows how many times she's had to get her car fixed. But it ends in this profoundly funny moment where Alvin cooks the deer up for dinner, and he actually mounts the antlers on the front of his trailer. And then there's a big sort of scene, this is roughly halfway into the movie, I think, where we kind of slow everything down. So Alvin is pulling into town, this new town. There's a very steep hill, and his brakes go out as he's going down this very steep hill. And so we get this very intense scene while this is happening, flashing back and forth between Alvin with his brakes out and then this sort of house that's being controlled burned by firefighters, some local firefighters. They're burning this house. I think they're teaching some of the new recruits or something. And there's a family across the road sitting there just watching this exercise happen. But of course, they see Alvin plowing down the hill. It looks as if this is shot really well too, because it looks as if he might actually turn wrong and run into the burning building, and you really are kind of scared here for a second for him. He somehow makes it down the hill. His brakes kind of kick in at the last moment. Miraculously, his trailer doesn't overturn. And the people across the street go over and help him, and some of the firefighters are helping him get the mower and everything off the road. And this family invite him to sort of hang out, stay with them while they attempt to fix his mower. But he's running low on cash. He needs a new part for the mower, so he calls Rose to try and get his Social Security check mailed to him. Eventually, the man of this house, who I'm not sure who plays this guy, but he's a really great actor. He has a very natural. All of the actors here, this is kind of what I was talking about, where you would expect to see like some of his regulars show up in this scene with this family, who are like, they're allowing Alvin to kind of stay in this shed that they've got back there, and he's working on the mower and everything. But again, yeah, none of the regulars are here, but all of these actors are very natural and very good. The guy offers Alvin to sort of drive him the rest of the way to Wisconsin. But of course, Alvin being stubborn and bound and determined to see this journey through his way, he refuses the ride. And then there's a great scene, very, very powerful, emotional scene. One of the old guys around town come over. He comes and is sort of talking to Alvin. They go to a bar, and this is the first time Alvin has allowed himself to have a beer in a very long time. He's had trouble drinking in the past, and he and this other guy, they have this heart-to-heart about both having served in World War II, and they're sharing war stories, which is, if you know any veterans, especially of that war, it's a very hard thing for them to do. Most of these men wanted to forget everything they saw, everything they experienced, and they do not like reliving those stories. They don't like telling those stories. So it's this very powerful scene, and you can almost imagine, I mean, I took this actually quite literally, in that I believe probably Richard Farnsworth and this other actor, they probably did both serve in World War II. I mean, they're the right age, and they're telling these stories with such conviction and such a sense of profound loss of what they went through. It's, I think, my personal, other than the last scene, it's my personal favorite scene in the film. And they're telling these war stories. Alvin remarks at some point that he says, all my buddies' faces are still young, but I'm getting older, I'm the one that's aging. And they talk about, having lived these lives that their friends could never live because they were killed. There's a great thing that Lynch does here where the music starts fading out and it starts getting a little more dissonant. The longer the guys talk, the music becomes more like noise, and eventually you actually are starting to hear like combat sounds. There's gunfire in the sound mix here. So they're doing some very literal, like, now we're going to stop everything that you've just seen and really kind of assault you with this story that seemingly comes out of nowhere in the film, but it is perfectly placed and timed. And then we get back to the shed where Alvin is staying with these people, and there are these brothers, these twins. They're called the Olsen twins. I don't know if this was an inside joke as well, but it's a very funny one if it was, because it's these two guys who wear these red hats, and they're fixing the mower, and they're charging him a bit too much money, he thinks, and he is able to somehow talk them down and convince them to charge him what he can afford to pay them, and they agree, of course. And so his mower is fixed, and so now he's back on the road. And then we get just more of these beautiful shots of the rolling hills, the score with the violins and the acoustic guitar playing a big role in this movie, really. He has to cross this bridge that goes over the Mississippi River. Great, beautiful wide shot that you see of this whole bridge. And then he eventually camps out that night outside a cemetery. And in the cemetery, there's a chapel, and a priest comes out and meets him, and they start talking. For the first time, really, in the whole movie, Alvin starts talking about his brother Lyle, and he talks about their relationship and how it has been strained, how they haven't spoken in 10 years. They both had difficulties with alcoholism, and they did not agree on several things. But he mentions how close they were as children. He says that we pretty much talked each other through growing up, which was a very, very powerful line to me. And again, like, Richard Farnsworth's performance here is just, it's just so authentic. I mean, I can see certainly why he was nominated. I honestly think he probably should have won. I don't remember who wins in 2000, but I mean, this performance is just so fully lived in, and he's just completely drawing on real experiences in his life, and is able to just convince you of the real nature of what he's feeling here. The priest sort of shows him or tells him, I think, kind of the way to get to Lyle's place. Now he's fully in Wisconsin at this point. He's in the home stretch. He's been pointed towards where Lyle's house is. I think he stops at another place and asks a bartender where Lyle is living or how to get to his house. And his mower breaks down again. Lo and behold. And then this guy on a giant tractor is pulling by. And there's this really cool wide shot where, and this actually happens earlier in the film too. Lynch does this a couple times in this movie, which could be possibly what he's talking about when he's talking about his most experimental thing. Because he's composing these shots like almost like an Edward Hopper painting, where it's like a very wide shot. You see some characters kind of in the distance. They're close enough that you can see them and you can make out sort of who they are, but you don't really see any details. But you're mostly, you're just kind of looking at the landscape that's in their immediate vicinity. But the dialogue is recorded as if far away, as if you are, from the camera's perspective, standing there trying to listen to a conversation that these guys are having, 100 feet away from you, which is really interesting. You don't see that a lot in films. I feel like when people do that, it is intentional and to a point. And I'm not sure if that goes here as well. I don't know if, like I said, again, he does it once or twice earlier on too. I think maybe the scene with Everett McGill where they're looking at the mowers and stuff, that might be one as well. And you can't quite hear exactly what they're saying, but you get the gist of it. And I guess if you put subtitles on, you'll know exactly what they're saying. But I think for this scene, it's really interesting to almost just be trying to literally hear what they're saying. And that is an experimental technique, I think. So that could go back to Lynch's quote about this movie. Anyway, the guy, he's talking to this guy who's on a tractor. Eventually, the mower starts up. It just kind of starts right back up. So he follows the guy on the tractor a little ways. The guy on the tractor sort of points out towards a field or towards a driveway that kind of goes into a field. And that is the road to Lyle's house. And Alvin, he pulls off on this road, stops his mower just short of the house, and he's kind of looking around. There's like an old rundown car, and there's some other stuff in the yard. And he gets out his canes and he starts kind of making his way towards the home. And he actually shouts first. He kind of announces his presence. He says, he yells Lyle, and then there is a sort of pause. And then we hear someone from inside the house yelling back Alvin at him. And he walks up onto the porch, slowly, of course, and struggling with the canes and everything. And out of the house comes Harry Dean Stanton. And if you know me, or if you are a fan of Lynch movies as well, Harry Dean Stanton he's my guy. He's just my guy. He always has been. Paris, Texas is my favorite film. I love any time he shows up in a movie, and I actually didn't know he was showing up in this movie, which made the reveal of him playing the brother just so much more powerful, I think. He is the only sort kind of repeat player other than Everett McGill from Lynch's kind of stable. Obviously, they had already worked together on Wild at Heart and Fire Walk with Me, and a short called The Cowboy and the Frenchman. But Harry Dean comes out and he's kind of made up to be a little older than he is. I think they're meant to be much closer than age than probably the real ages of Richard Farnsworth and Stanton at that time. So he's got kind of an old age beard on. But he does this perfect Harry Dean thing where he just doesn't say anything for quite a while. They sit together with each other on this porch. They just kind of sit down. Alvin is looking at him very longingly, obviously very happy to finally be there, to finally be in his presence, to see his brother alive. And Lyle is mostly focused on the mower, and he's looking around at it. He tears up. And this is what I love about Harry Dean Stanton and what he does best, this just perfectly natural. He embodies this guy who's full of sorrow, who hasn't seen or spoken to his brother in 10 years. And he realizes that his brother, his older brother, mind you, has driven over 200 miles to see him, and he's done it on this lawnmower. And he says, "Did you ride that thing all the way out here to see me?" And Alvin, he doesn't even say yes. He just sort of nods and acknowledges. And then they both kind of sit in silence for a little while, and nothing else is said. The camera floats upwards. There's a beautiful kind of dissolve, and the camera floats into the stars and is sort of ambiently floating through the stars as the credits begin to roll and the music is swelling. And it's the perfect ending. I think it really is the perfect ending to this kind of film. I like that there wasn't this long, drawn-out conversation between the two of them of like, why are you here? What are you doing here? How come we haven't talked? Why didn't you call first? None of that even matters. What matters is that these two men, these two brothers, are together again. And it's like everything from the past dissolves, and all that matters is the present moment, which is something that Lynch historically is very interested in, right? He's a devout practicer and proponent of meditation, of being present, right? So after watching this and after kind of like letting it settle in a little bit, I do kind of get what he's saying, in that it is more experimental in the way that he's not like letting loose his demons here. He's not really operating on the typical kind of dream logic that governs most of his movies. He's not necessarily trying to say anything or place any kind of hidden meaning under the surface, which, I mean, if you know Lynch's movies, you know that the majority of them are really kind of focused on the kind of societal rot that is underneath this perfect, pristine, fake sheen of suburbia and of wonderful small town living and the white picket fences. And, if you think about Blue Velvet and all these themes that he's constantly returning to, right? With Twin Peaks, with Fire Walk with Me, with Mulholland Drive, of the nature of the kind of beast that lies under Los Angeles. This movie is just straight down the middle. It's him saying, look how once we overcome our own faults and our sort of trespasses against each other, how kind we can be to each other, how wonderful and how good human beings can behave towards each other. That's why I say it makes you believe in the goodness of the human spirit, and to see this guy, the things that he goes through. And here is another just like stunning layer to this movie and the making of it. But Richard Farnsworth himself is struggling with prostate cancer while they're filming this movie. In fact, when you see him struggling to walk, that's real. He's really struggling to walk. I think they utilized some special kind of walkers for him to get around, but he was hardly mobile. And there are these stories from the cast and crew who were all just really impressed with his tenacity and with his ability to keep going and working these long days and long hours. I mean, actors work incredibly long hours. Movie sets, you're working 12, 14, 16-hour days most of the time, which is insane if you would think about it in any other profession, but for some reason it's acceptable in entertainment. Anyway, he's 79 years old. He's got prostate cancer. During the filming, the prostate cancer sadly moves into his bones, and he's getting worse and worse as the production goes on. And ultimately, tragically and unfortunately, Richard Farnsworth decided the following year to take his own life because his pain was too great. And so you get this kind of coda to this movie almost of this guy has made this journey. In the actor's case, it's his journey through life and through film and through being an actor for 50 plus years. And then he's gone. And he is obviously remembered with the Oscar nomination, but they didn't give it to him. Just, again, not the first Lynch movie I thought I was going to cover on this show. Not even the third or fourth, I imagined. But it now strikes me as one of the most important, I think, because it is so heartfelt, so wholesome and pure, so without any kind of message or bias or any kind of real point to make other than there is goodness in this world and look what happens when people stick together and take care of each other. I teared up. I got a little misty-eyed, and it takes a lot to make me cry from a movie. I've only done it a handful of times. A few of them have been watching Harry Dean Stanton, and when he starts crying, I start crying, man, on screen. There's just something about the way he does that and his face and him as an actor, as a performer, being so natural and so just without artifice. There's no artifice in this movie. There's no fake facade. It shows you exactly what it is. It presents you the exact kind of world that you're seeing on screen. There's no fakery about. And for that reason, I just thought it was a beautiful, wholesome film. One that I'll go back to quite a lot, I think, over the years. Maybe when I turn 79, I'll watch this movie and decide if I'm still around at 79. God help us. I'll watch this movie and decide to drive a lawnmower across country for no other reason than maybe to say that I did it. I don't know who I would be going to visit. Anyway, please watch The Straight Story if you've not seen it yet. If you're a David Lynch fan and you've not seen it, watch it simply to complete the filmography. It is the outlier. He never made a movie like that again. As we know now, he probably never will. It's sort of up in the air if he's going to be able himself to make any more movies. Sadly, he's come down with emphysema as well, much like this character, and he's kind of restricted to staying at home. Now, if you've read any of the news or heard any of the news, then you'll be familiar. But fascinating movie, lovely movie, 1999, best movie year ever, some would say. That's it. That's all I have for today. This is a shorter one. We're taking a breather here. And if you need a break from your daily grind, from your work life insanity, or if you just want to feel something whole and feel something good again, please watch The Straight Story. It will affect you. I don't think that I could see anyone watching this movie and not being affected in any way whatsoever. I think if you're a very cynical person, you might find this movie overly watery. I myself am often a cynical person, especially watching films, and I actually like cynical films as well, because they often feel more honest and truthful. But to me, this movie was one of the most honest and truthful things I've experienced in a while. So I enjoyed it. I recommend it. Yeah, what else? What's coming up? We have another best movie year ever, and just a few more episodes left of this season. It's really running away with me, or running away from me, perhaps. But I hope you enjoyed today, and I hope you watched The Stray Story. Please follow us, give us a like and a comment and a subscribe and all of that good stuff. And have a lovely day. Happy viewing, as always. Take us out, Paul.
This has been Film Splaining with Martyn Strange. We hope you enjoyed the show. Till next time, happy viewing.